Big Brother says no beach for you. How Florida handled COVID right. Tattoo artist arrested in North Carolina. The mayor of Chicago will lock you up for having fun on the street. The tyrant governor of Michigan strikes again. Violent arrests at NYC for lack of social distancing. More on China's insidious cover-up. And what the heck are murder hornets?
Attention on the beaches and boardwalks. All city and state beaches have been ordered closed by the state. Please remain clear of the beaches and boardwalks until further notice. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your cooperation during this difficult situation.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. That was a helicopter doing its best Orwell 1984 impersonation, telling people on a beautiful sunny day in California, which is why do you live in California near the beach? So you can go to the beach and because you've got great weather. That's why you put up with the horrible politics, the very high taxes, the terrible traffic. Why do you live in New York? Why do I live in New York? Why have I chosen to? Well, I was born here, and my family's here. But aside from that, I could have moved many times. But you are here and you deal with the subway and the overpriced real estate and the crowdedness of everything because we have the highest concentration of restaurants of pretty much anywhere in the world, at least of a certain quality. And you have all kinds of stuff going on. And if you like stimulation and things to do, places to go, this is a phenomenal location, right? New York City is amazing. If you want great weather and beaches, you go to California. And those things are shut down now. You can't do that. You can't do those in New York or in Los Angeles. And you also can't do it in a whole lot of other states, although they're starting to see the light. They're starting to understand that this is just absurd. My friends, it's time to open up the country. It's long past time to open up the country. There is no good reason to continue with this lockdown. Just work through the logic on this yourself. Don't let people shout you down. Don't let people tell you that the experts have some consensus, that they already know, that there's something out there, there's some study you haven't read yet that undercuts your whole point. It's not true. You remember what you were told. I remember what we were told, that this was all to flatten the curve so that healthcare systems would not be overwhelmed in this country. Nowhere in this country was the healthcare system overwhelmed. It did not happen anywhere, including in New York, which has been hit by far the worst, although I'm seeing now Michigan per capita has had a very high fatality rate from the disease. But New York has had the most cases, the most fatalities. It's not even close. It's a very difficult distinction the city has. We have the most deaths from a pandemic in the last 20 years. We have the most deaths from a terrorist attack in the last 20 years. New York has been getting it pretty tough for a while now. But the rest of the country, those of you who are listening right now in Texas, in Colorado, in Florida, in North and South Carolina, in Indiana, in Minnesota, those of you listening all across the rest of the country, you also have these restrictions in place. And you must ask the question, why? Your healthcare systems were not overwhelmed. In fact, the biggest pressure on the healthcare system, if you're in any other state listening to this, if you're in Washington State, the first place to get hit with a major outbreak, the Portland area of Oregon. I mean, just pick a place. And the biggest problem that you're seeing in the healthcare system is that we do not, in fact, have enough procedures going on to keep those systems going. We're furloughing nurses and doctors, which furloughs come before firings, right? Furloughs are what you do as a measure, an extreme measure, where you have productive employees that you wish you could keep, but you simply don't have the cash flow to keep them on payroll at that time. By the way, many media companies are doing this too, and this is a problem. This is a problem across the board, but it's a huge problem in the healthcare system, which we were told that's why you have to flatten the curve. Okay, so now we're at this other place. So we've seen that the curve has been flattened, and now we're being told, as we're going into the warmer months, we do know, why would this respiratory virus, again, facts, reason, logic, put aside the shrill part of, you just want grandma to die. Just put aside the idiots for a moment. Why would this upper respiratory disease act differently from all the different strains of influenza, Why would this upper respiratory disease be different than other coronaviruses? Remember, this is the novel coronavirus. This is a new one, right? SARS-CoV-2, as opposed to SARS-CoV-1, which was, we just knew that one as SARS, right? Severe acute respiratory syndrome. Why would this be different than all of those when warm weather, we know, limits transmission? Now, why? There's a lot of theories as to why, but does anyone get as worried about, and many of you who are listening to this are in the high-risk category for flu, and you deal with that, and hopefully you take the vaccine, or if you don't take the vaccine, you keep your immune system as strong as you can, you take those basic precautions. But are you more or less concerned about flu in July than you are in January? We all know the answer. And yet now our public health officials and our increasingly tyrannical governors and mayors, people that are supposed to execute government policy, not make up laws. And that's what they are doing. They are making up laws in this process. Where does their authority end? Do they have the authority to tell you you just flatly cannot leave your home on pain of arrest because of a virus? Why not? They think they have the authority to tell you you can't be out in a public space with a few people around you, masked or not. They think they have the authority to tell you you can't open your business. And if you do, as a tattoo parlor owner in North Carolina found out over the weekend, they'll show up and they'll arrest you. They'll throw your butt in prison for doing something that you should be able to do. You have a constitutional right to be able to do. And yet they just say no, lockdown for as long as we say. Quarantines, remember, also always, there's a reason we call it a quarantine. Does anyone know why we call it a quarantine? It's interesting. You learn more about the history of pandemics and you understand more about how we should view this current moment. Quarantine comes from the quar, Q-U-A-R, Italian for 40, right? When you look at the origins, I mean, that's the base of the word. It's because it used to be that you would stay indoors away from people for 40 days. So there was always a risk. There was always an understanding that you would come back up. 40 giorni. There we go. 40 giorni. 40 days. The Italian word for 40 days. This is from 14th century ships. Particularly Venice was a place because of all of the commerce around the Mediterranean and the Silk Road, which Venice was a connection to, right? You had the Silk Road that took it across Asia, and then it made its way to the Mediterranean, and then it spread across the Mediterranean. Venetian ships were hugely involved, particularly in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, in the trade of goods across the Mediterranean. But that's how we got to 40 giorni, 40 days. But that was what it was, right? You would stay, if you were on an infected ship, you would stay for 40, and then you're done. It wasn't 40 days and then maybe another 40 if somebody else gets infected a day later. And, no, there was an effort to keep a very specific risk of infection low and contained, but not for everybody. It wasn't when a ship arrived in Venice and they had to put it in the 40 days of quarantine. But the whole city was under quarantine. That's not the way. Otherwise, they would never be able to function, right? Every time they had a concern about this, we have gone overboard. Now we're at this. We're going to just keep on lockdown, unlock, lockdown, unlock, lockdown, unlock. This is crazy. It's absolutely nuts. And remember, they're not taking sick people and trying to prevent and setting them aside and say, hey, while you're sick, you got to stay away from people. They're telling all of us to stay in our homes. What's the justification for this? I keep reading these scaremongering headlines, and the Drudge Report, which is a site that I've for many, many years been reading. I mean, going back to college, I've been reading the Drudge Report for decades. It's just scaremongering now. Fears of a second wave. Every day I see more fears of a second wave. Well, what's the alternative? When will there not be fears of a second wave? When we have a perfect test and trace system up? That's absurd. That's never going to happen. So we can stop with that. But that they keep bringing up something that's as absurd as the test and trace, because what else are they going to say? Lockdown forever? They know lockdown forever is not a real option either. And then that brings us to our current moment. Open up the country. Protect the vulnerable and give people freedom and choice. right? We should have very strict procedures in place for nursing homes, for assisted living facilities, strict procedures. You know, if you're talking about a place where you have a high concentration of people over 65 living together, temperature checks, making sure that, blood draws from staff to check for immunity. I mean, whatever you got to do to make those folks safe, but you can actually do it in those situations. And for families who have a senior living in the home, they need to establish how they keep that person safe, how they can create a safe, and maybe the state does have to step in and allow for, there's all these different hotels that are offering up rooms for first responders. I mean, there are ways to deal with this, is all I'm saying. But you can't do this to the entirety of society. It's not possible. You can't protect everybody, and especially because the numbers don't show that everybody's at equal risk, not even close. So why are we still in lockdown here? Why is it that when I was out on a beautiful Saturday, walking outside in New York, and I went to the park and I took the dog for a walk, and everyone, including people on bicycles, people jogging, people on these little electric scooters and this other contraption that's like one wheel that you stand on that, drives you along, and it's like a unicycle, but it's electrified or has electric propulsion. Electrified would be a different kind of thing. Why are they all wearing masks? Well, because if you don't wear a mask now, you're a bad person. And that's really been the change. If you don't wear a mask, you're a bad human being. You're putting people at risk. That's interesting because 2 months ago, we were told when this was at maximum spread, when the volatility of this virus couldn't have been any higher, when it was more likely than ever that you would have been around people with the virus, don't wear masks, you'll steal them from the first responders. That was the theory. The theory was wrong. We keep seeing experts being wrong all along this pathway. And I mean Fauci, I mean Birx, they're wrong over and over again. And yet, if you have any questions about the experts now, we haven't learned from the last 90 days. You see, at least as a society, we're very slow to learn this. The people who are telling us what to do, they're making it up as they go along. Other than the most basic common sense precautions, shut down the whole country? Does anyone think that that was a good idea? There are literally thousands of counties with almost no cases of this. Almost no cases. I'm sure there are a lot. I'm sure there are hundreds of counties with 0 cases of this. I mean, it depends on where you are. Lockdown. You got to go lockdown. I think there were 5 states that resisted the total lockdown, but even in those states, I'm sure there were procedures put in place and limitations, and also how much business, how much business are a lot of places going to be able to do when the rest of the country is not doing any business. So the ramifications of this have been enormous, as you know, and they're not changing. We're going to have to push back. This is where we are now. We're no longer in a place where we can sit. YouTube is taking down anything that's contrary to the WHO, and governors are saying that you can't protest because protest of policies is non-essential. Religious service is non-essential. Liquor stores are essential, and no offense to liquor stores, but all these other things, non-essential, they say. Look at how quickly those of us who have been warning about the growth of government at all levels and the need to keep government in check and our concerns about the administrative state and its ability to inflict itself upon us with really no ramifications for it other than it wants more money and wants to grow. What are we to do? There's no accountability. Those of us who have been warning about this, now we have a situation where we're basically there. We're at a point where the government thinks it can tell you what to do, what you get, where you can go. And where is the justification for this? As I said, for public health reasons, 500 years ago, 600, 700 years ago, they would say if you were on an infected ship, possibly with plague, they'd keep that ship separate for 40 days. So at least you knew that after 40 days, you're going to be. But once this thing has spread all over the place, you're going to quarantine an entire civilization, an entire society, endlessly. All diseases in the past have either become cyclical and human beings have built up immunity to it over time. And yes, there have been devastating losses. There have been devastating losses from flu, from malaria, from smallpox. But over time, we either develop immunity to these things, or over time we develop In the more modern sense, we've developed therapeutics and vaccines. But shut down everything indefinitely and then keep shutting down. No, that's not an option. And this is what the public health authorities have led us to. They can talk about all the benchmarks and all this other stuff, but that's really just a bunch of malarkey, because we need to just reopen the country and start taking smart measures and do what we can to protect the vulnerable population, and also make sure that we take the basic mitigation measures that we would all take for any respiratory infection. You know, hand washing is a good idea, period. It's a good idea in hospitals. You have 80,000 people die a year from hospital-acquired infection. You know what the number one reason for that is that they cite? Either dirty instruments or dirty hands being used in the OR. It's one of the biggest risks. That's right, not washing stuff. So we are now seeing the point where we've crossed over as a country to this can't be allowed to continue anymore. But the governors and they're pushing harder. They're going in the other direction. They're saying we are doubling down on this policy, and if you have a problem with it, we'll have people with guns and sticks throw your face into the cement and make you sit in a cell for a day or two. How do you like that? This is going to get very bad, my friends. Enough is enough. The lib consensus around endless lockdown was wrong. It was unnecessary, and it's time to stop. And everyone can start yell and shout about, but what is their plan? A phased? No. There's no phased over months and months and months with the possibility of more lockdowns and more phasing and more lockdowns. The virus is out there. We can take steps to try to live and continue with life, or we can hide under our beds as a society and hope that the experts who have been buffoonish in seeing this coming, in knowing what to do about it in the beginning, at the public health policy level, it has been a catastrophe. But we're supposed to listen to them now about how we should run our entire society? I don't think so. Open up, folks. It's time to open up. Team, you know what I was doing over the weekend? Listening to my audiobook of Savage Son by Jack Carr. Now, Jack Carr is a former Navy SEAL, so when he writes about this stuff, you know he knows what he's talking about. But Savage Son is fantastic. This is an audiobook that will take you deep into the heart of hunter versus hunted. It explores it through the perspective of somebody who has seen the best and worst of humanity, and it's all about the mentality that we need as a species, human beings, to fight, to win, and to understand the risks of being complacent. It's a fantastic book. I'm ex-CIA. When Jack writes about the intel community, he knows what he's talking about. The details you're getting that are realistic are just that. They're trying to bring you into the mindset, bring you into every scene. Jack Carr is the guy. Go read Savage Son now. Download the audiobook. That's what I've done. Wherever you listen to audiobooks, just type in Savage Son and download Jack Carr's latest thriller. That's what I'm doing. That's what you should do too. Go wherever you get audiobooks, download Savage Son today.
If you're scared, you're going to stay back a little bit and you're going to watch it. And I think anyone over 60, because we have a pretty good roadmap right now. Anybody over 60, you could say 65, but let's make it 60. We have to protect those people and we have to watch it, and maybe they stay back longer. But no, I think you can really have it both ways. I think a lot of people want to go back. They just want to go back. You see it every day. You see demonstrations all over the country, and those are meaningful demonstrations. Oh, it's big stuff. But you also have some people that are very scared. Probably everybody's scared when you get right down to it. It's a terrible thing that happened to our country.
I think the president sees this the right way. People want to go back. If you don't want to go back, you don't have to. No one's making anyone leave their home. No one's making anyone go out and not do enough social distancing or whatever it may be. So if staying home, as we're led to believe, keeps you safe, although I would actually argue that in some circumstances staying home, depending on whether you have someone else in the household who's not staying home, the transmission rates in the home are very high. But the president gets it. People should be allowed to make decisions about their lives now. And the government shouldn't be making all these decisions.
We've saved lives in the process, and we have to keep listening to the epidemiologists and experts and not listen to the partisan rhetoric or these political rallies or tweets for that matter. We have to keep doing the right thing, the next right thing. Whether you agree with me or not, I'm working to protect your life if you live in the state of Michigan. I'm going to continue to do my job regardless of what tweets come out or what polls come out or what people think that is, makes sense. We're going to listen to facts and science because we've got to get this right.
What do the facts and science tell us? Someone should ask Governor Whitmer that one. Someone should ask what it is exactly that she thinks we're supposed to do here. Remember that there's a great quote that I'm sure you have seen many times shared, but it's from C.S. Lewis. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. I destroy all your rights and tell you what to do for your own good. America, or Michigan in this case, that's what Governor Whitmer is saying. We're also hearing how she may be a late contender here for the Biden vice presidential nomination. Oh, I didn't mention that there's some new Biden stuff we'll have to get to. Some fascinating efforts to make Joe Biden okay for liberal feminists to vote for, even though there is still this completely credible allegation out there against him. And based on the standards that were set up for the Kavanaugh tribunal, which is what it was, Joe Biden should be finished, but he's not. They'll rehabilitate his image, or they'll just pretend that it was never marred in the first place. It's all fine. It's all fine. That's what they'll do. But Whitmer is telling everybody that this is for their own good. And I can imagine the people that are showing up whose businesses are being destroyed, and particularly the small business owner is getting the worst of it here economically in many ways. Because if you're a worker, maybe you are covered by PPP for a while. And in fact, some workers don't want to go back to work because they're making more money now than they had before the pandemic shut everything down. And if you're wealthy and you have savings or you can work remotely, you don't really care. But it's the person who has put their life savings into a small business of some kind, or a person who has spent a decade or 2 or 3 building a business that employs a handful of people, who sure now has money to pay the wages of his employees, but doesn't have sufficient money for rent, for utilities, for all the other costs, and has to wonder if he'll ever or she'll ever be able to reopen. Those are the people that are having the worst end of this economically. Those are the people that are having the most difficulty here financially. But there's not a lot of focus on it. I mean, I saw that 1/3 over the weekend. What I read was that 1/3 of small businesses may never reopen. That's nationwide. That's tens of millions of businesses. 1/3 of them may never reopen. That's what we're losing here in this process. And you could say, oh, well, they'll just start another business. Oh, that's very easy to say. How much capital have they eaten up in the process of trying to get through all of this? How much have they lost in sales? And what will these businesses be like when they do come back? I went to a cafe over the weekend, with takeout only, social distancing line. I mean, New York has these very strict mandated procedures. You can't walk into a drugstore. If you're running into a drugstore saying, hey, I've got to get my medication, I need my heart meds or something, and you don't have a mask on, sorry, buddy, go get a mask somewhere. Not allowed. That's where they are now. But I went into a cafe over the weekend, and I will tell you, I had a producer Mark. It was a turmeric, a honey turmeric latte, which was delicious and cost about $7, but it was quite good. And turmeric has anti-inflammatory properties, I will have you know.
Well, I hope it keeps you nice and healthy.
Thank you. That's right. So I'd never had one of these before. That was the fanciest latte ever. It was delicious, by the way. But I went in, I asked the young man who was working in the, good gosh, Buck, I asked the guy who was working behind the counter, I said, how are you doing? It's a beautiful day outside. He said, well, on our best days, we're maybe doing half the business we would on a normal day at this time of year, on our best days. And now that's obviously during the lockdown still, but I would wonder how much how much of that will change. You know, there are a lot of people who are completely terrified by this, including a lot of people who are at very, very low risk of it, but they're terrified anyway. And Governor Whitmer and notice how Democrat governors are more likely to take the extreme view, the apocalyptic view of this, and Republican governors are more willing to say, hold on, maybe we should open up and do more. But how has this become partisan? I think it's more than even just about Trump. I think that there's a difference in the ideology and belief of conservatives and liberals on a very fundamental level. I think conservatism is more, well, of course, more concerned about government overreach generally. Although I see people who are pro-Trump and who are conservative media personalities, and they're like, lockdown as long as it takes. Listen to the experts. And I'm like, what? Listen, what experts? What are they saying? We have this guidance from the federal government, but it's just guidance. And haven't we learned that some states are at much greater risk than others? So shouldn't some states be moving faster than others, even under the guidance that has been put forward by the federal government? And we'll see. We'll see how this goes in places that don't listen to the most extreme scenarios of this. And I'm not even getting into all the fighting now over how they're counting, deaths as COVID related. And there's all this other stuff. I mean, hospitals now are incentivized. This is real. Hospitals are getting paid more for treatment of people if they die from COVID-19 than if they died from any other cause. Now, you get yelled at if you bring this up, but from what I understand, that is occurring. I mean, this is from medical personnel who are saying, yeah, look, this is a real thing. You also have the hospital systems clamping down. I was supposed to have an interview with a doctor on this show last week. I was going to bring on somebody who had a very interesting point of view on this. You know what happened? I got a message that someone else from his hospital system had spoken to the press, and the president of the hospital found out about it, and I'm not sure if he's been suspended or just got an official warning letter, but he got in trouble. The doctor wouldn't come on. Wouldn't talk. I can't. It's like, I can't. I don't blame the doctor. I'm just saying this is where we are now. So the experts, the quote experts, are who you should listen to. But if you bring on, or if you want to talk to an expert who deviates from this consensus in some way, you'll get in trouble, or you'll get put off. You'll get shut down from YouTube, or you'll get removed from social media. That's not how science works. Science is never about consensus. And this is why, the collective, the beehive mentality of libs, do what we say or else, we're all right because we all agree. This has really exploited and really bastardized science for a long time, because it's about what is true, what is provable, what is repeatable. It's about theorizing and then testing and then retesting and testing again. They don't seem to get that. And there are huge areas, there are huge gaps of our knowledge in science dealing with a whole bunch of things, including COVID-19. And so you need to be open to ideas that are not necessarily mainstream, right? If we only relied on mainstream ideas for science, we would not have the advances that we've enjoyed in the last 150 years. Because go back in time, as I've told you, and there have been people breaking with the consensus, and they're the ones that lead to breakthroughs. People that come up with ideas that are not, if they were commonplace, then everybody would be testing it. Everybody would know. But instead, we have the hive mentality of the left taking over here once again. And Whitmer and all these others saying, just shut down because that's what the experts tell us to do. Well, then someone explained to me why Florida, which we were told was going to be a disaster. Same thing with Sweden, but let's bring it home to Florida. Florida is now like the Sweden of America, which I don't think anybody would ever think that's a phrase that's uttered, but here we are. Florida is like the Sweden of America. Let me explain why in just a second.
We need to focus on facts and not fear. And I think that there's been a lot that's been done to try to promote fear. We were told over and over again, Florida was going to be just like New York when it came to the coronavirus. Well, let's look at the tail of the tape. How close were we to New York? Fatalities. Obviously a much different picture. We have, this is equal population per 100,000, much less. Even if you did absolute numbers, we have 2 million more people. New York far, far and above what Florida is. Same thing with hospitalizations. Hospitalization rate that is a mere fraction of what you see, not just in New York, but many other states. And so saying Florida was going to be like New York was wrong, and people need to know it was wrong.
Why was it wrong, too? They did say this. They claimed that because Florida has a particularly top-heavy population when it comes to age, right? You have a bulge at the top of the age bracket. Although not as much as per capita Maine. I didn't know this. Interesting fact. Maine has the highest per capita senior citizen population anywhere of any state in the country. So as a percentage of overall population, not in total numbers. But Florida did not get hit nearly as badly as people were saying it would. You had flight from New York City at the height of spread to Florida. And so there were all these concerns that you were going to have effectively New Yorkers infecting Florida and adding to that rate of spread of the disease. And we had all these very concerning news stories coming out about this. And everyone was saying, well, Florida's not locking down fast enough or with enough urgency, so it's going to suffer this terrible fate. And then we saw what the numbers were. And Wall Street Journal pulled this together in an editorial over the weekend by Arian Campo Flores and Alex Leary. Smart or lucky, how Florida dodged the worst of coronavirus. Now, remember, we saw what this virus does when it has essentially unrestricted ability to engage in community spread and to go all over a population. We keep hearing about, oh, we did the lockdowns. This was in America at least starting in middle of January. And most states were not really locking down until April. So you had spread and spread and spread. And we see in New York City, 1 in 4 people are believed to have been infected with this. So this had an enormous spread. Now we're going to be told, oh, no, because of the lockdowns, we prevented the catastrophe from being so much worse than it was. Well, okay, but explain Florida to me, because Florida has not suffered a catastrophe relative to other hard-hit states at all, despite having an older seniors, a lot of senior citizens in the population. Florida, according to this Wall Street Journal piece, had, quote, 6 deaths per 100,000 people as of Saturday, compared with 42 in Louisiana, 56 in Massachusetts, and 97 in New York per 100,000. So Florida has 6 per 100,000. New York has almost 100 per 100,000. That's an enormous difference for 2 states that both have large population, a lot of senior citizens, a lot of major urban areas. I mean, if you look at this, you say, well, hold on a second, how did we get it? But there's no interest really in looking at what Florida did right. Instead, they just wave it aside and say, oh, well, Florida, they got lucky, I guess. Really? Lucky? Maybe the fact that people in Florida have more outdoorsy lifestyles than they do in New York. Maybe the fact that the governor there allowed for high-risk areas to move more quickly, lower-risk areas of the state. He localized the response, did not do a one-size-fits-all lockdown policy, as we're told was necessary. If you want to save lives, you must do this, right? If you want to save lives. And you look at, as of Friday, for example, this is from last week, there were 1,384 residents of long-term care facilities in the state with COVID-19, or 0.9% of the total resident population. There were 388 deaths of long-term care residents. People aged 65 and up make over 20% of Florida's population. And again, the second highest proportion of anywhere after Maine. So Florida was supposed to be just like New York, just like Italy, and it didn't happen. Why? Now, there are some, as I said, lifestyle differences between the way New York City operates and the way Florida operates. But you look at northern Italy, are they all in mass transportation? Why were they hit so badly? There are lessons to be learned here. And luck is not one that we're just going to accept and move past. Because Florida didn't do what the ultra lockdown crowd said they had to do. And in a sense, Florida this way is kind of like Sweden. People were saying that when I say people, I mean the consensus view was that Sweden was heading for disaster. Disaster did not befall Sweden, even though Sweden did not do what the lockdown chorus was saying Sweden needs to do. So now we turn around and say, well, hold on a second. Sweden, okay, fine. Maybe that's far away. And I hear all these stories about how Sweden has like a particular culture and it's so different. Although, why did South Korea manage this without locking? Why did Japan manage without locking down its whole economy? Countries have done this without the lockdown. And everyone can claim now, which I see happening, oh, well, they're basically doing a lockdown. They're just not calling it that. Really? Because a couple of weeks ago, it was they're heading for disaster because they're not doing it. And then when people see results that don't fit with what their view was or what their advice was, all of a sudden what they said a week or two ago no longer matters. I don't like that. I don't accept that. Florida was supposed to be heading for disaster. I remember there was so much pressure. Oh, the governor needs to lock down the beaches. He didn't lock the beaches down fast enough. He's the mayor from Jaws, which I just rewatched recently. And there's a lot of COVID-19, great white shark theoretical crossover. When you watch Jaws, you'll say, oh, yeah, this is the economy versus saving lives. And there's some real it's a movie for our time. And it's such a great movie. I was just talking to Snow Princess and my mom about it over the weekend. It's such a great film. You know, it really holds up so well. It's in that sort of pantheon of just great cinema where it's not great because people tell you it is. It's great because you want to watch it 100 times and it's super entertaining and well done. So Florida was supposed to be at this really great risk. It didn't end up happening. Why? They don't have answers, and they don't want to find out the answers. They just want to tell you, lock down, shut up. We'll tell you when you can come outside. Remember, they didn't lock the beaches down fast enough, but it turns out that they were okay. Remember all the spring breakers that were getting all this abuse heaped on them? You know, people that were, high school, college-age spring break. If you're 18 to 22, your risk from this virus is almost zero. Now, you could say, Bach, but they're going to infect older people if they're around. We should work on separating young people who are 20 from older people who are at higher risk. Because herd immunity is happening one way or another. So controlling the spread within the herd is a better public policy, and that had been public health policy until now. But no one even wants to look at Florida as an example. They just want to find excuses for why it doesn't count somehow. Lockdowns must continue until we say they end. I'm not buying it.